I will ask now the first speaker, Robert Galinsky from DNV, for the presentation. His presentation has the title Marine Supply Chain Support to Offshore Wind Industry. Robert is the Offshore Wind Director for the Americas in DNV. He has been involved in offshore industry in Europe for over a decade and directed projects for offshore wind farms in UK, Netherlands, and Belgium. Prior to his move to Houston, he oversees the North Sea operations for DNV based on Aberdeen. In his current role, Robert holds responsibility for management of operations and strategy related to DNV's classification business for offshore developments in Americas. Please, Robert.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be here. I hope you can see my presentation now, Serge.
Please.
Okay. I just want to address a few things that are quite important in the industry. You know, we're seeing a true revolution in how offshore wind is developing, and the global demand for green energy is growing exponentially. Offshore wind is certainly one of the main sources to obtain clean energy, but with the eyes on technology, increased capability of turbines, and ever-growing expectations of quicker delivery, then we have to ask ourselves, can the supply chain keep up? So I want to dive a little bit into the aspects of the supply chain and the service that services the offshore wind industry, and touch on how best we can prepare to take the offshore wind transition into the level that we desire. But before I jump into that, I want to give you a very brief introduction of DNV and what we do. So in DNV, we've been working with renewables for decades. In the offshore wind sector, we've built a reputation of a trusted partner to tackle global transformations. We've been involved in offshore wind developments for over 30 years and have essentially been involved in every offshore wind project globally in some form. When it comes to vessels engaged with offshore wind, DNV has the majority of class in major vessel categories, including SOVs and wind turbine installation vessels. Globally, DNV has over 2,000 energy experts working in the space, and we have unique experience spanning from the full life cycle of the offshore wind projects, from feasibility, development, engineering, construction to operation. We have a unique position to be able to interface with all levels of supply chain, which gives us a wide exposure to the issues in the industry, which we can then leverage positively and impact the development of ocean space technologies. Part of our commitment to the industry is the annual Energy Transition Outlook, which we publish every year, presenting the energy trends that will affect the world in the near future. And the last version of it was just published now on September 1st. So if you are interested in having a look at that report, I will provide a link at the end of my presentation. But I want to kind of set the scene with a few slides to illustrate the potential of offshore wind before we jump into the supply chain discussions. So we are approaching a future where the world will need less energy, even with the global population increasing and the economy growing. By 2030, we estimate that energy use peaks, and then from that moment on, we'll see humanity using less energy. Large energy efficiency improvement in all sectors and accelerated electrification with electricity dominated by renewables will be the primary source of energy, and the supply will peak in 2032. Fossil fuels will reduce its share of the energy mix from 81% today to about 50% by 2050. As you can see from the chart, the renewables, in particular solar and wind, will be playing an important part moving forward. Electrification is fundamental to the ongoing energy transition, and electricity demand will more than double between now and 2050. Share of variable renewable energy sources in the power mix will grow from 8% today to about 70% in 2050. Grid infrastructure will need to improve to ensure it can handle the high demand that we foresee is coming. Since electrification is a major theme in the ongoing transition, what you see here is a massive shift in the power mix. We expect that the electricity as an energy carrier to more than double over the next 3 decades, with dramatic changes in the electricity mix as solar and wind take over from coal. By mid-century, 36% of the world's electricity will be supplied by solar and another 33% by wind, combining into a 70% mix. And then fossil fuels will account for just 13% of the power generation. So combining that with combining floating and the fixed wind projects, they will certainly chase the onshore wind developments, and they will scale to comparable levels by mid-century. Lower energy prices for renewables give room for gas-fired electricity to stay longer in the system. We estimate that gas power generation will decline from 35 to about 29% by 2050. Solar and wind will be the most competitive options in most regions, even without government subsidies in place. And over time, likely by 2030, it will also be cheaper than existing coal and gas power. This growth pattern, of course, assumes that the investment is made to ensure success. There's a firm commitment from governments and from major developers, but also the rest of the supply chain to make this happen. There are, however, several areas where we need to focus on to succeed. Globally, the offshore wind energy industry installed about 5.5 gigawatts of capacity last year alone, mainly in China and in Europe. And the pipeline for the global capacity right now is about 307 gigawatts. When we look at the floating wind in isolation, you'll see that the power capacity has tripled in the last year, and now the overall segment grows from 7 gigawatts to about 26 gigawatts currently. Size of the turbines is constantly growing, with the next range expected to be between 12 and 15 megawatts, soon to be available in as early as next year into a couple of years. The advancement in technologies has propelled the industry into significant growth, but with the leap comes some challenges. Focusing on capex, for example, is key to success. We are seeing that some Asian projects are opting more on controlling capex with lesser capacity in the projects as a trade-off. So you'll likely see different strategies in different parts of the world when it comes to managing these projects moving forward. Floating wind will actually define a lot of the strategies for the future. So I want to give you a little bit of substance. So the floating wind turbines, they give access to far more wind resources over deeper water, at least 4 times as much ocean space compared to the bottom fixed wind. So this gives an increased flexibility in site selection, including possibility to take advantage of areas with higher wind speeds, areas with lower social and environmental impacts, and so on. So next 5 years, we expect to see significant technology development in floating wind to reduce cost, scale, and increase applicability. To put this into perspective, floating wind will contribute 250 gigawatts. That accounts for about 2% of the world's electricity generation by 2050. This corresponds to a development of more than 3,000 times the size of Hywind Tampen, which is the world's largest floating offshore wind farm currently under construction in Norway. Floating wind can bring clean energy to coastal communities, previously unserved by wind power. For example, some of the mega cities in Asia Pacific. But there's also other aspects that create interest in floating wind. Opportunities, for example, for oil and gas and maritime players to transfer their skills, vessels and yards into new growing industry, and the opportunity for using floating wind to power oil and gas installations to reduce CO2 footprint, which we're already seeing. So when considering the challenges of developing and building offshore wind projects, it's critical to have a holistic view of the complexity of these projects. First, these are offshore projects. We have to remember that. So the weather and site conditions create a major challenge. And increasingly, projects are becoming larger and moving further offshore into deeper waters. Second, technology is continually evolving with the drive towards increased reliability and maximizing energy outputs. And this evolving technology impacts the requirements for ports and vessels and other infrastructure and equipment. So layering on top of this are complex challenges with regulations, uncertainty and competition in the power markets, and challenges with connecting projects to the grid. Connected to all of this are supply chain challenges that are critical to successfully managing the development of offshore wind projects, particularly in the face of continuous pressure to reduce cost and manage risks. As an example, global supply of installation vessels needs to accelerate to meet the demand, as currently there are very few vessels that can handle installation of the larger turbines. Developers are commissioning new installation vessels, but since the lack of supply is really a global issue, we will see new building activity in places where these vessels were never built. North America is being a prime example where that's actually happening. So this creates challenges with the ability of the shipyards and manufacturing facilities to support these projects, and in turn, the supply chain has to mature far quicker than expected. And as a result, this uncertainty regarding the ability of the global fleet to handle planned installations, in terms of capacity, comes into question, even for projects that are up to mid-2020s. So really, it's highly reliant on how quickly the supply chain can keep up to be able to materialize these projects. A shortage of installation vessels could lead to increased wind energy costs, for example, and higher vessel charter rates or project delays. So that can have a major impact overall. Installation vessels are, of course, only one of the types. We need to look at every other support vessel that's out there as well, to really appreciate the size of the supply chain itself. Tugs, barges, survey vessels, cable layers, heavy lifts, rock dumpers, CTVs, and SOVs are all part of the picture, and each needs a separate look and has separate pricing model, delivery model, and so on. In some cases, the industry will be able to repurpose some existing vessels. However, with environmental targets in mind, this can be applied to all ships, and therefore alternative fuels will be very key for chartering vessels to service the wind farms in the future. Developers expect it, the world expects it, and it's certainly a needed connection with the ultimate vision of a cleaner future. So to illustrate the technological advances that can drive infrastructure development, I want to briefly show you one of the offshore charging solution concepts for wind farms. This offshore charging point is a concept under development currently. It aims to enable idle vessels to turn off their engines and replace the fossil fuel burning with renewable energy when they're idle. Maersk Supply Service has agreed with Ørsted to pilot a buoy at their offshore wind farm, and the test is set to take place sometime this year. And upon successful testing and concept approval, this will be offered to congested ports and energy companies for vessels that are idle. Another key aspect is the port infrastructure. The development and timing is key here, and could turn into a challenge if not handled correctly. Some ports may struggle to keep up with the growing size of these projects, and this will push the current infrastructure to its limits. Heavy lift operations, for example, storage space, hook height limitations for lifting appliances are all areas that need attention. Ports are the center of the offshore wind industry. All the transportation goes through them. They're the base for the O&M activities for offshore wind farms, and they are the crossroads for the entire supply chain. So a huge expansion is likely. It's predicted across the world, with Europe, Asia, and America leading the way. And the ambitious targets set cannot be delivered without having huge investments in port infrastructure. Heavy loading quaysides, deep berths, hydrogen infrastructure, and of course space are going to be main focus areas for investors and for financiers as well when it comes to planning of expansion. The potential for ports and harbors is in key locations, needs to be assessed in terms of fabrication, assembly, integration, staging, manufacturing, maintenance, and service of support vessels. So we'll likely see some key ports completely repurposing what they do now to service this industry. Because ports are so crucial in this ecosystem, they will also be crucial in decarbonization. Over the next decade, ports will likely play a key role in upscaling renewable hydrogen infrastructure. They're a natural location for electrolyzers, for example, and suitability assessments at ports are already being conducted. So renewable hydrogen produced in ports can be stored locally and consumed within the local business ecosystems. It can also be used as a fuel for transportation or processed to obtain ammonia for use in marine shipping. The development of port infrastructure is commonly a matter of local, regional, and national authorities. So the strategy for these will heavily depend on what position those governments take, and it will largely shape the direction of the developments in individual countries. Optimizing what was done offshore versus import will take a big impact on CapEx, and we talked a little bit about CapEx and how important it is. So developers can save time on installation if ports provide support. Moving manufacturing shoreside reduces cost and increases safety to personnel compared to doing it offshore. In case of floating wind, mooring prelay can reduce commissioning offshore. Government subsidies, for example, will likely be required, and work needs to start soon to ensure the supply chain can keep up. But overall, I think we shouldn't really try to reinvent the wheel. There is a mature supply chain in existence already, and served many industries in the past, mainly shipping and oil and gas production. That certainly can be reutilized as long as it adjusts to the expectations of key stakeholders. The preference for many governments is to promote local capabilities and boost local competence and resources. With the kind of commitment that we're seeing in the offshore wind industry, we are likely to see major investment being directed at local businesses to support. Okay, I will stop here. Many thanks for listening. I'm happy to take some questions if there are any. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert, for your presentation. I can see here some questions. But first of all, I would like to ask you one quick question about offshore hydrogen production. Mm-hmm. How you're feeling about this development, and which countries are in the front running of these projects?
I mean, first of all, I think the green hydrogen production is likely going to be the future. The key really is in maturing the infrastructure associated with it. to be able to take full potential of what it can do. I have no doubt that being able to produce hydrogen as one of the main kind of power sources in the future is going to be the way forward. And you know, Europe certainly is looking at it. There's a lot of government support, a lot of subsidies that are currently in place to develop this technology. I think Asia is also certainly a market to look at. So those two are key geographical locations where I think this will take off.
Okay, Robert. I think we are running for time. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I hope you join us the next events. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great to be here. Appreciate it.